Brain fog feels like, as some of my patients describe it, like trying to read in a dim room. The ideas are there, but they never quite come into focus. Another patient describes it as swimming in pea soup. Something is mentally weighing you down and slowing response times or getting hung up on comprehension. For many people, that fog shows up after viral illness, chronic fatigue, neuroinflammatory conditions, or the hormonal shifts of perimenopause. At the other end of the spectrum is flow state, those rare stretches where attention feels clear, the body and mind move as one, and time loosens its grip. In my clinical work, I find it helpful to treat brain fog and flow as living on the same set of pathways, just tuned in opposite directions. When those pathways are stable, flow becomes easier to enter and stay in. When they're unstable, fog becomes the default. In this video, I want to walk you through that framework in simple language. The 4 pathways and 8 neurotransmitters that sit underneath both brain fog and flow, and then show you how acupuncture can act on each of those pathways in turn. Hi, I'm Paul Rooney, licensed and board certified acupuncturist and founder of Neurological Acupuncture of New Hampshire, where I combine the convenience of house calls with the gentle effectiveness of more than 28 years of acupuncture experience. Let's jump in. You can think of brain fog like a sound system. Here, brain fog is not one broken speaker. It's the whole soundboard slightly out of tune. Flow is what happens when the levels come back into balance and the song feels like it finally clicks into place. That first pathway is the vagus nerve. This is the main feedback line from your organs on up to your brain, carrying a constant, steady stream of information about heart rhythm, breathing, gut movement, and whether your internal systems are stable and free from signals of imbalance. When your body's internal signals are clear and steady, your nervous system has an accurate read on how you're feeling and functioning. One way to measure this is through heart rate variability, or HRV, which reflects the small changes between each heartbeat. HRV is closely tied to breathing and tends to be higher when your body is calm but alert. A higher HRV is a sign that your vagus nerve is functioning well, helping your body handle stress and recover more effectively. Research shows that people think more clearly and perform at their best when their nervous system is balanced. When the system prepares you for action, the sympathetic nervous system and the system that helps you rest and recover, the parasympathetic, they're working in coordination rather than competing. We see similar patterns in music performance, yoga, and other flow-like activities. When people are deeply absorbed, their heart rhythm becomes more organized and heart rate variability often increases or moves towards a more coherent pattern. In brain fog, especially after infections like COVID, this coherence is often disrupted. Many patients with long COVID or chronic fatigue syndrome show low HRV signs and signs of a sympathetic overdrive, wired but tired, where fight, flight, or freeze reaction is overactive and that rest and digest is underactive. This leads to a state of simultaneous anxious, cloudy, and being fatigued. Vagal signaling does more than steady the heart. When the vagus fires, it releases acetylcholine into the immune cells and tissues. That acetylcholine, it binds to the nicotinic receptors and triggers what's called the cholinergic anti-inflammatory pathway. It's a reflex that lowers inflammatory cytokines. In practical terms, better vagal tone means less information static hitting the brain. Circulation improves, oxygen delivery to the cortex steadies, and the body's alarm signals quiet down. That's the physiological opposite of fog. In long COVID, there's now evidence that viral persistence and inflammation can reduce serotonin levels by diverting tryptophan down the kynurenine pathway. That drop in serotonin appears to weaken vagal signaling to memory centers like the hippocampus, which may help explain the combination of fatigue, low mood, and cognitive dulling that many patients describe. In flow state, in contrast, it behaves like gentle vagal training. Breathing naturally deepens, muscles soften, and attention narrows to a meaningful task. That combination activates the vagus, stabilizes heart rhythm, and lowers inflammatory output over time. Like a thermostat that's finally start reading the room correctly again, the vagus nerve lets the brain match internal settings to what actually is happening in the body. This is exactly where acupuncture can help. When I place needles at specific points that influence breathing and the auricular branch of the vagus, points, for example, like lung 7, kidney 6, and the sympathetic ear point, we see measurable changes in autonomic tone. Clinical and experimental studies using auricular vagus nerve placement show reductions in heart rate and increase in overall HRV, which is consistent with stronger parasympathetic input. From there, the signal travels into the nucleus tractus solitarius in the brainstem and then outward into a wider autonomic network. That afferent pathway, meaning brain to body signaling, is the same cholinergic anti-inflammatory reflex described in vagus nerve research, where activating this pathway lowers cytokine release and protects tissues from inflammatory injury. Clinically, what patients feel is simple: a softer breath, a slower pulse, a quiet sense that the background noise has been turned down. You can think of vagal-focused acupuncture like putting the nervous system's metronome back on the table. Once the rhythm is steady, it becomes much easier for the rest of the system to fall into time. The second pathway lives in the spinal cord and brainstem. This is the throttle that sets your overall level of arousal. Too low and you feel dull and sleepy. Too high and you feel wired and scattered. At the center is the locus coeruleus, the brain's main source of norepinephrine. When norepinephrine, think adrenaline, output is stable, attention can lock onto a task and stay there. When it's unstable, you either cannot get started or you can't settle. And flow appears when the locus coeruleus and norepinephrine system is operating in that middle zone. Enough norepinephrine to keep you engaged, but not so much to tip you into stress. Dopamine partners with this system. Each small win during a task, a correct note, a clean sentence, a smooth movement, it triggers a dopamine pulse that makes the effort feel rewarding. That dopaminergic feedback loop is what makes flow feel both productive and enjoyable. In brain fog, this loop is often blunted. Inflammatory signals can dampen dopamine and disrupt norepinephrine regulation, so effort feels heavy and unrewarding. Pain makes this worse. Chronic pain constantly pulses attention away from higher tasks and keeps the brainstem locked in a defensive posture. Here, the spinal pain modulation system is critical. Sensory input from the body travels up through the dorsal horn of the spinal cord, but it also modulates from above. Descending pathways from the periductal gray and the rostral ventromedial medulla release endorphins and serotonin into the spinal cord and brainstem, while suppressing substance P, it's a neuropeptide that amplifies during pain and inflammation. Now, during deep engagement, whether athletic, creative, contemplative, these descending circuits activate. Endorphin levels rise, substance P falls, and pain signals are gated before they fully reach conscious awareness. People often describe this as about forgetting about their pain while immersed in something that they care about. Flow, then, it's not just a mental experience. It's a carefully tuned arousal and analgesic pattern in the brainstem and spinal cord, where norepinephrine, dopamine, serotonin, and endorphins all lean in the same constructive direction. Like adjusting both the brightness and the volume on a screen, this pathway decides how sharp your internal picture is and how loud the background noise feels. Acupuncture interacts directly with these circuits. When I insert needles at small intestine 3, urinary bladder 62, or large intestine 4, the mechanical and electrical signals travel up the nerve fibers into the dorsal horn. From there, they engage the same periductal gray and brainstem nuclei that regulate descending inhibition. Acupuncture has been shown to preferentially release endorphins and enkephalins that bind to opioid receptors, inhibiting substance P release and dampening pain. Higher frequencies can recruit opioid and norepinephrine mediated mechanisms. Now, human and animal studies consistently show decreases in pain scores, along with reductions in substance P and increases in beta endorphin after treatment. Clinically, that means more bandwidth for cognition. When the constant pull of pain is eased, the brainstem can retune arousal towards focused engagement instead of defense. You can think of the spinal brainstem focused acupuncture like turning down the buzzing of a fluorescent light in the next room. The moment it quiets, you realize how much effort you were spending just trying to ignore it. The third pathway is the Neuro-Immune Pathway. And in many patients with brain fog, the underlying issue is not a lack of willpower, but ongoing inflammatory signaling in the nervous system. Cytokines are essential for fighting infections and repairing tissue, but when they stay elevated, they start to change how the brain works. They alter neurotransmission, activate glial cells, and shift energy away from higher cognitive function towards defense. The result is what immunologists call sickness behavior: fatigue, slowed thinking, low motivation, often a low mood that feels qualitatively different from classical depression. In conditions such as long COVID, chronic fatigue, and autoimmune illnesses, and in some perimenopausal states, this pattern is quite common. Long COVID research, for example, has reported both elevated inflammatory markers and changes in tryptophan metabolism that reduces serotonin availability, correlating with brain fog and other cognitive symptoms. Flow interacts with this pathway in three main ways. First, by reducing chronic stress. Stable flow experiences tend to lower baseline cortisol and sympathetic drive over time, which reduces the stress-amplified cytokines. And second, by engaging the vagal anti-inflammatory reflex we discussed earlier. When the vagus fires steadily, acetylcholine acts on nicotinic receptors, on immune cells and glial activity, turning down the cytokine output. Third, by rebalancing neurotransmitters that talk directly to the immune system. Serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, GABA, and endorphins all have receptors on the immune cells and can shift them towards a more regulated, resolution-oriented profile. In a long COVID 2023 paper, it showed that restoring serotonin, either pharmacologically or by supporting tryptophan metabolism, they improve cognition and memory in many patients. From a clinical perspective, the key idea is not that inflammation doesn't just make you feel tired. It changes the gain on the whole system, raising the noise floor so that clear thought has trouble breaking through. Like trying to have a quiet conversation in a busy cafe, neuroimmune dysregulation makes every internal signal compete with a constant background buzz. Acupuncture has a growing body of evidence base for modulating that immune noise. Meta-analyses in animal models of depression and inflammatory conditions show that acupuncture can reduce pro-inflammatory cytokines in both blood and brain tissue. Clinical studies in humans with conditions like chronic pain, fatigue, and allergic inflammation also report reductions in inflammatory markers after treatment courses. Mechanistically, much of this seems to run through the same vagal cholinergic anti-inflammatory pathway described in basic science work. Acupuncture needles input at Sanjiao 5, gallbladder 41, and stomach 36 recruits vagal afferents, which then trigger nicotinic signaling on macrophages and microglia, turning down cytokine production at the source. In practice, patients describe this as a gradual lightening. The brain fog softens, fatigue feels less oppressive, and flares less frequent or less intense. You can think of neuroimmune focused acupuncture as helping the immune system remember the difference between emergency and ordinary life again. The way a neighborhood calms after a fire alarm has been struck on for too long. The fourth pathway is where most people's attention goes first, the brain's core neurotransmitter. In reality, brain fog is not a single neurotransmitter problem. It's what happens when the whole conversation between acetylcholine, serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, GABA, glutamate, substance P, and endorphins loses coherence. Acetylcholine is the spotlight of attention and learning. It helps you encode new information and keeps the right things in focus. In perimenopause, declining estrogen can reduce acetylcholine synthesis and receptor sensitivity, which is one of the reasons why word finding and memory lapses becomes more common. In long COVID, interactions between the virus and nicotinic receptors, it may further blunt cholinergic tone. Serotonin provides emotional steadiness and cognitive flexibility. Long COVID and chronic inflammation can lower serotonin by diverting tryptophan down the Neuro-Immune Pathway, leading to both mood changes and cognitive slowing. Dopamine is the drive to engage. When dopamine is suppressed by inflammation or chronic stress, everything feels like pushing through sand. Norepinephrine sharpens signal to noise, but when it spikes in the wrong pattern, it produces anxiety instead of clarity. GABA is the brain's ability to say not now to irrelevant signals, while glutamate powers learning and plasticity. Too little GABA or too disorganized glutamate feels like being flooded mentally. Substance P carries pain and stress signals. Endorphins soften them by creating a sense of embodied safety. In flow, these systems line up. Acetylcholine locks onto the task at hand. Dopamine rewards the progress. Norepinephrine stays at a steady optimal level. GABA silences distractions. Glutamate drives learning in the specific circuits you're using. Serotonin and endorphins rise towards the end of the experience, sealing it with calm satisfaction while substance P resides. Functional brain imaging studies show acupuncture has a similar pattern on the brain. Stimulation at specific points has been shown to modulate the default mode network and its anti-correlated task networks, shifting connectivity in regions like the medial prefrontal cortex, the posterior cingulate, the anterior cingulate, and the hippocampus. These are the same hubs involved in mind wandering, pain processing, and executive control. That network level rebalancing is another way of describing a more coherent mononergic and GABAergic landscape. Like an orchestra where each section is finally following the same conductor, the brain's chemistry during flow, it's not louder, it's just more synchronized. Repeated acupuncture has been shown in animal and human studies to influence the expression of enzymes and receptors tied to dopamine, norepinephrine, serotonin, and GABA, as well as increase endogenous opioid activity. For example, needling at pericardium 6, spleen 4, and active scalp points along sensory motor frontal regions like DO20 to DO24, gallbladder 8 to gallbladder 9, and stomach 8 has been associated with changes in the default mode network connectivity and improvements in mood and cognitive performance in patient groups with depression and chronic pain. HRV-focused acupuncture trials suggest that stabilizing autonomic tone, we can indirectly support mononergic balance, since these transmitters are tightly coupled to autonomic state. In the clinic, this often shows up as a shift from wired to tired to awake and grounded over the course of a treatment series. People report clearer word retrieval, more consistent focus, and a return of curiosity. You can think of this as pathway as like color correction for the mind. The image was always there, but the tint was way off. Acupuncture helps the brain rediscover its true palette. When you put these four pathways together, a simple pattern emerges. Flow is what happens when one, the vagus nerve is sending a clear, steady signal of internal safety. Two, the spinal and brainstem systems are tuned to a band of calm alertness and effective pain gating. Three, the immune system has turned down those excess cytokine noise. And four, the mononergic and GABAergic networks are synchronized instead of fighting against each other. Brain fog is what happens when those same pathways are working against each other. Acupuncture and flow both work by helping these systems remember how to align. In my practice, I think of acupuncture as the way of an external reset, a way to send precise pattern signals into the nervous system and reopen the pathways that illness, stress, and hormones have narrowed. Flow building practices are then the internal training, the daily activities that keep those pathways active and strengthen them over time. Acupuncture reintroduces the rhythm. Flow helps you learn to keep the beat on your own. For patients living with post-COVID brain fog, chronic fatigue, neuroinflammatory illness, or perimenopausal cognitive changes, that combination can be powerful. It does not erase the underlying condition, but it can restore a sense of mental brightness and agency. Proof that clarity is still present in the system and can be reached through the body's own circuitry. Like watching a dimmer switch slowly rise, you don't go from dark to daylight in one step. But with each small increase in coherence, more of the room becomes visible again. Now, if you'd like to find out if my protocols are a good fit for you, please contact me by email, text, or DM. Links to that and the research I cite in the description below.